karma, the idea of karma, is that a behavior you do, an action, maybe even thinking that you have, goes out into the ether and it boomerangs back to you. So if you have a negative feeling towards someone, it sort of goes out into the atmosphere, and then, you know, like a boomerang, it ricochets around maybe, but it comes back to you. That's behaviors that you do, actions you do, thinking you do, can go out and make you feel like, oh, I've done that, or it's away from me, but it comes back. It can come back to haunt you, or it can come back like, hey, I did this good thing, and it came back and it benefits you. I am not a proponent of karma. I don't really think that, hey, if I do something good, that is going to do some cosmic scale thing and tip the scales, and then it's going to have to be paid back into my bank account. I'm not much for thinking about these cosmic bank accounts. Like, I don't think God is a banker trying to send God's only son to pay off debts, and I don't think that karma is like trying to keep people's bank accounts flattened out and straight, and I don't believe in karma really. But on the other hand, I do have a belief that is eccentric, or maybe goes against everything that I hear or everything that I feel, or that feels a part of the world we live in, and that is that I don't believe that we're individuals. I think we're pumped full of individualism. I think you don't see this anytime, maybe more than when you're in your car. You're surrounded by the bubble that you own, and so people's behavior is very like, oh, it's about me, I got to be in front of this car, I got to get there faster. I don't believe that we are as individualistic or as much individuals as we think we are. I think instead we live in a great web of people, and that behaviors that happen in our community do come and affect us. I do think that, like, you can essentially pour something in the water where you live, and that someone lives downstream from you, but that you always live downstream from somebody. And I don't believe in karma, like bad goes out and it comes back, or good goes out and it comes back. But I do believe that other people's decisions affect mine, and that I am not as in control or as much of an individual as I think I am. So I don't believe in karma, but I do believe in systems, or in this big spider web of God's creation. Good morning, good afternoon, welcome to Preparing for Sunday, where you and I take a look together at the upcoming Sunday scripture text. This is for Sunday, July 2nd, 2023. We are now to the 5th Sunday of the season of Pentecost, after Pentecost. In the world that we live in, I think it's more significant as Americans that this is that big holiday weekend, 4th of July weekend, where everything is red, white, and blue. I think that karma / systems opening sort of tells you that I maybe am not a typical American. I don't think like most Americans. I don't believe in karma, but I do believe that we're interwoven, and that how you take care of a person matters. I think this is biblical, incidentally. I think a lot of the stuff in the Bible, when it says you, is you plural. It's talking to a whole group of people, but we read it as you individual. And so there's some interesting stuff there. So I'm not any less a patriot than anybody you know. I mean, I really appreciate being American. I never enlisted. I wasn't in the military to support this. I did think about it for quite a while, and maybe have that is something I may want to do when I grow up, for a long time. And, still sometimes have some interest in that. But I'm kind of on this holiday weekend. It's ordinary time in the church. It's a special time in the nation that we live in, and I'm kind of doing this sort of go against the flow of our culture idea of living in a system instead of as an individual. The text for this Sunday is Matthew 10, 40 through 42, and this concludes this 3-week little piece of Matthew that we've had. We are in Matthew's second discourse. So remember, Matthew has 5 great discourses of Jesus to match the Pentateuch from the Old Testament, and this 10th chapter is the second of Jesus' discourse. The first one is the Sermon on the Mount, which has a lot to do with how to consider yourself and how to treat others. This one, the second one, is called the missionary discourse. And so now we're thinking about being sent, and how Jesus sends the church and sends people. And so that's where we are in this second discourse. And really, we're getting the very tail end of it. And so we are to a sort of short reading that wraps this up. Like last week's reading, this continues to be string of pearls conversation. So what that means is that this is probably stuff Jesus said in a lot of different occasions. He put out into the atmosphere at different times. Like at dinner, he just had this cool quote and someone remembered it. But in terms of the narrative of the way Matthew tells the story, he just puts them all together like a string of pearls. Like Jesus had these pearls, he could have said them anywhere in his life. And I'm going to talk about the likelihood of which of these he probably said or maybe didn't in a minute. But so that was in last week's reading. It was a string of pearls that were sort of like set together but fit but don't really fit. We have this week 3 more pearls. They fit but they don't really fit, and it wraps up this second discourse, and it's the missionary discourse. And to me, what we're thinking about here is a hard thing to think about, because Jesus is from a different world, a different time, a different way of being than we are. And here we are in the midst of this holiday week. And as Americans, it's a lot about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, working harder, being proud of ourselves, making money for ourselves, really getting our family ahead, driving in our own little bubbles, what we can buy, what we want. We've become pretty individualized. And this text about this missionary wrap-up text is very Middle Eastern, and it's not individualized. It's the exact opposite. It is very systemic. I think that way already. That's a life experience. I don't think I'm an individual. I think I live in community, that I'm connected in strange, often unseeable ways with other people. So in that way, this is kind of a weird text for a holiday weekend. It's not the same as the emotion or the feeling of the culture that we live in. So with that, I'm going to get into this, but I'm going to tell you, we have July 4th, and then we have 5th Sunday after Pentecost, and to be honest, they are not perfectly, it's not a great overlap. They're kind of different. So let me start talking about the text a little bit. It's Matthew 10, 40 through 42. This string of pearls is held together with this sort of trick of word usage. So in the first 2 pearls, the word here is welcome. Whoever welcomes, whoever receives you. So those are used in 1040 and 1041, the word welcome. And then, so there's some overlap there. And then 41 and 42 use the words reward. And there's the overlap that puts the pearls together. 40 and 42 don't really have any overlap or fit. But then there's this pearl in the middle that does overlap with each of them. So that's sort of the structure of this. 40 and 41 have welcome, and that's why they sit together. And then 41 and 42 have reward, and that's why they sit together. And again, string of pearls, second missionary discourse. But maybe more than anything, what I want you to look at when you read this is that they seem to be about not karma, but about how systemic life is. That if you cut down a tree in the woods behind your house, that may have an effect on your home and where you live. And if you're affected, then you might be stressed out and be triggered and take that out on someone that day. And that person may go home and say, this person said this to me, and get in a debate with someone at home. And we live systemically. I'm a firm believer in that choices I make impact other people, and that's a system, and choices they make impact me. That's not the same as karma, but that seems to be what we're talking about here with this being sent. Jesus seems to recognize that God can send Jesus. Jesus can come into our midst. Jesus can interact with the disciples. The disciples can be sent out, and all those things can set the system moving in a direction that's different. And if we're individuals, then the choice that one makes doesn't always have a huge impact. But if we're intertwined, then God can make this decision. And a person, like you or I, thousands of years later can be affected. And so it's pretty biblical to think systemically, and maybe part of you wants to, but culturally we don't think this way as Americans at all. We think it's about, our me and how my job or my school or my grades affect me, and we seldom think of ourselves as a member of a whole classroom of kids and what's going on in there. Hey mom, this unit at school was this teacher said this to me and I don't like it. But we don't ever think, hey, maybe the teacher had to say that or interact because they were talking to a whole classroom of kids. See, it's just a different way of thinking, and it's hard in a video like this or in a short period to really convey what's being asked to believe this. It's a thing that you would have to sit with and be prayerful about, because it really is at odds with what we're constantly bombarded with. I want, and this is much more like how are we cared for by being a part of a system that God cares for? Much less what we want, and much more like what a beautiful, caring God we have, and how the whole system is a place of health if we contribute to it. You're really going to get that feel as we move through these verses. If you want to, you can pause the video and read 10:40 through 42, and then you'll kind of hear what I'm talking about here. The first saying, the first pearl, is Matthew 10:40. This one has quite a few equivalents in the other Gospels. That makes this highly likely that this is a pearl that Jesus actually said and was remembered. It's also found, similar words of Jesus are found in Luke 10:16. So Matthew 10:40 is similar to Luke 10:16. It's also similar to Mark 9:37. Very similar verses, very similar words. Those, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called are synoptic gospels. They see the story the same way. They tell it in mostly the same way. So if all three of them have it, that's one thing. But this is also in John 13:20. And so when you get overlap from the synoptics and John, the likelihood that Jesus did this is really high. So this is very, very likely a pearl Jesus did say. And so what he does here in 10:40 is he collects the 12 and he sends them out. And there are other places in the Bible that talk about what will happen to you if you do not show hospitality. Hospitality is a huge, huge concept. It is housed within this idea of living systemically. It is a very Middle Eastern concept. There's a lot of shame and honor and hospitality things in the Middle East that we don't have the same way here. We talk about, hey, there's people around that we don't know, so let's lock our doors. In the Middle East, it would be like there's people we don't know, so we're inclined to have to take care of them, because who knows when that's going to be us and we have to be taken care of. And you can see the difference between individual, like, hey, let's lock our door so I'm safe, versus systemic, like, we take care of so we might be taken care of. You can see that that's different. This is Jesus talking about hospitality and how hospitality works. And it's in Matthew 10. It's this missionary discourse. It's Jesus collecting the disciples and sending them. And so this is written and transposed and shared for you and I, like the Word of God, as a thing Jesus very likely said. It moves at odds to this individual impulse we have because we're Americans. However, it is a big part of what it would look like to live faithfully. I'm asked, well, why do we have another church meeting in our building? Why do we have this going on or that? Hospitality is a centerpiece of faith. Welcoming and being welcomed is an enormous, I can't even put into terms how big a piece of faith that is. Jesus eats with sinners and tax collectors, and that has to do with hospitality, and that has to do with sitting. And often I hear this individualized, why would we hope that? Or why would we do this? Or why? They're not like me. And that's not taken into account in hospitality. And what Jesus is talking about here is the system. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. Whoever welcomes you and me welcomes God. And so this is very Middle Eastern. It's very systemic. It's very much like about openness to God doing things. And it's very different from how you or I think. I think in this, it's probably law. It's probably a big challenge for you and I to be more brave, like put ourselves out there and make ourselves vulnerable to needing to be hosted, and also having to host better. We're so worried about ours, mine, that we don't follow this hospitality very much. I would say this is one of the places where the Bible becomes a huge challenge for us. Missionary being sent, oh, that's fine, but that it's centered around hospitality, being welcomed, and then welcoming. This is a real place of need of growth for me. I don't have many people over in my house. I am not a great hospitable person. I would say in some ways the church, which is a third place, it's not our home, it's not our work, but it's like this place in between, is a great place to be hospitable, to have the open table, to welcome people in. And I think we're doing okay at that, but we should always be thinking about how to do that better. So there's 1040, and man, we're already in the thick of having to really be thoughtful people, to let God move us into away from our sinful, self-centered way and into God's way. So this is already a hard reading. It's a short 3 verses, but we're already in 1, and it's already difficult. And by the way, Jesus said this, and it is real. Jesus said it. It's in all 4 of the Gospels, and it sits bad with you and I. And we should, use confession and forgiveness and ask for God's help to do this better if we really want to see God's world bettered or God's kingdom come. Maybe this is part of the reason why God's kingdom feels so distant now, because we feel so shut off from the idea of systemic taking care of each other. If I take care of this person, I'm building a good society that then I'm proud to be a part of. And not maybe me building it, God's building it through us. But you get what I'm saying there. Not karma, but definitely systems. All right, the second saying is Matthew 10:41, and this one couldn't be different from 10:40 in that it's the same in that it both uses the word welcome, and it becomes the overlap verse, but this one has no parallels. It's not found anywhere else in the Bible. It is, though, talking about an idea that is everywhere in the Bible. It's a very Old Testament idea. I believe that Matthew probably inserted this to hold his string of pearls together. It may or may not be a thing Jesus really talked about in this way, but it is definitely a thing that's talked about in the Bible. There is a huge thing in the Bible about deciding whether a prophet is for real or a false prophet. So the Old Testament is filled with debates over whether a person is a real prophet or a false prophet. And the scary thing about this is the way that people determined if you were real or false. And believe me, in the Old Testament, every prophet in all the books of the Old Testament wrestle with this. Is this person really saying God's will, or are they not? And in some ways, that's pretty American. Like false news or real news kind of thing. And it's filled with, this person isn't really from God. How do you decide? How do you know when news is real? The way that the Bible decides if a prophet is real or not is if the message is one you want to hear or not. If you want to hear it, it's closer to false. It's more likely to be false. If it's a difficult word, it's more likely to be real. If the person who's delivering it is willing to sacrifice or lose in order for that word to be shared, they're putting their life at risk, it's more likely true. Now think about what that means. If people are shit talking to the extent where they're willing to put things at risk for themselves, that means that what they're saying in the way Bible talks about prophets or false prophets is more true. They're willing to sacrifice. They're not doing it to make $1 million. If you're saying a thing to make money, it's probably closer to false. If you're saying a thing because you think it's true, even if it costs you, it's probably closer to true. That's the spectrum the Bible lays down. That's Matthew 10 has this piece about being welcomed and prophets and false prophets, and that's a very biblical debate. Jesus may not have said this, but Matthew is sparking that piece to say, hey, this is going to move against how you feel. You want to worry about yourself, you want to get the job that makes more money, but now you're being asked to welcome a person who says a thing that challenges you. Remember last week, this comes right on the heels of families will fight, I came to bring a sword and not peace, and these pearls fit together because they're saying God's word is not the same as the accommodation we hear in the world we live in. It's not Roman. It's not like Roman governance that just says, hey, behave and we won't put you to death. Uh, hey, work well and you'll make and have the right job and take good care of yourself. It's saying, hey, things don't always go well. You live systemically, and someone 10 houses down from you can make a choice that really damages you. But as you live faithfully, you are given God's Spirit, which guides you through this system in a way that keeps you from being triggered or blaming, or really helps you feel at ease in this world. So there's 1041. 40 and 41 overlap. 40 has a ton of parallels, 41 not so much. But we're talking about hard stuff here. And this is not really, to be honest, fun scripture to sit with. When people say, I love Jesus, and I love that God loves me, they don't often quote these verses because they're not as fun to hear. Now, 1042 doesn't correlate to 1040 very well, but it does overlap with 1041 a little bit with that word reward. 1042 has some slight overlap. It is in Mark 9:41. So again, this is probably something Jesus said, but it's also not something everybody really remembered. The first one is really true. The second one, I think Matthew is just sort of reminding you of something from the Old Testament. In 1042, it's sort of a littler used statement of Jesus. Matthew repeats this verse in chapter 18. So Matthew really likes it. And what we have here is overlap with Mark 9:41. In Mark, it says you. In Matthew, he changes it to little ones. Whoever the reward you welcomes you, and then this one says whoever welcomes a little one. Matthew's way of saying it is different than Mark's. Remember, for a prophet to really be a prophet, they aren't trying to look grand or have everything put together. As a matter of fact, they're closer to a real prophet if they're a little one, if they're risking a lot and really aren't going to gain from sharing this. Think about why that might be. If a person's going to make $100 off of you, they might say whatever they want. It's about the money, not the content. If they're a little one and it doesn't stand to gain a lot for the person, then there must be some truth that they're really interested in and not so much the payday, if all that makes sense. So this is talking about reward, and to me, the reward that we're talking about is not heaven. So we think of it, we hear this as like this individualized, like I'm going to get heaven if I behave well. And that is not really what it's saying. To me, it's talking about being at ease in the system we live in. It's not karma, like I do well and I'm going to get to live in heaven well. But what it is being set well into the way God made creation. That's what faith is. Faith is a big, long acclamation or sharing of God in how we fit in God's plan. The world keeps telling us, and it's like this false prophet, you fit into God's plan by doing really well and making a lot of money and being successful. This is saying that you fit in well and you earn your reward by being well adjusted to the way it works. And the way we become well adjusted is to start to move away from how it's all about me and much more into an awareness. You can almost see the ripples sometimes when something happens to somebody down the street or that you work with, and how that can move across the office or the classroom floor and affect you. And what faith does is put us in a position to walk through that better. The reward we receive is not heaven, it's not karma, it's abundant living. It's a successful, a well-adjusted, spirit-led living now. All right? So 10, 40, 41, and 42, I just gave you how they all fit together. It's the end of Jesus' second discourse. It's a missionary discourse. It's a lot about hospitality. I'm going to hit on the fact that this is pretty countercultural on a holiday weekend in the sermon. And so I'm going to try to overlap the holiday, but then attack it a little bit, not because I'm not a patriot, but because I think we need to, as Americans, be Americans together, not Americans on our own who tell everybody else what it is to be an American. I think that to be a part of this country and to be a part of the blessing that we have is to be a part of it together as a unified group of people who live together systemically, not as a person who always has to be the one in charge. That fits this false prophet, systemic instead of individual stuff here. And so I'm going to talk about that a lot. And I'm going to talk about how really I think we move into God's will. I'm mesmerized by how tiny the thing is. It's just this cup of cold water. It is the tiniest thing. And for how tiny it is, we may or may not have a good batting average with accomplishing it. So there's the background for Matthew 10, 40 through 42. Next week we move into a different section of Matthew, and you might be like, whew, you know, string of pearls and things that are challenging or a law. I'm ready to be done with it. So these are going to ask us to grow, to think, to be critical thinkers, to sit before God and confess, hey, I don't always do that. I need your help in order to move into a healthier, deeper life. I'm going to try to talk about that Sunday with a very personal story that has to do with the people of St. Stephen and I, and a feeling I have about you all, and a feeling you may or may have felt me having about you. I'm going to put my feelings on the line Sunday, so I hope you join me, and I hope you kind of get the context of where I'm coming from when I try all that, and I hope it's a thing we do together, and that in doing it together, it's not John setting himself in front of everybody, but we are a system, we are God's people, and well, where each of us are raised up by God's presence in sacrament, in word, that is a way that God can raise the whole community around us, and that God doesn't work just for me, just for you, but God works for all of God's creation. That's a thing we'll think about together, and what it means to be sent, and how we are part of this rising tide for God's creation. Enjoy the holiday weekend. Join us for the parade. I think that'll be fun. But remember, the parade even is a mass of humanity in which we're linked. And it's this linkage that God moves through. So I hope you stay safe. I hope you enjoy a holiday weekend. Maybe more than that, I even hope that I see you in worship Sunday. I would love to have the chance to say hello and see how you're doing. So stay safe. Be careful with that air quality out there. And I will see you soon.